Who is Representative Andy Ogles? You know he was at the July Congressional hearings on UAPs. You heard the comments he made after leaving the classified briefing with the ICIG, and you know he's a member of the UAP caucus. But does anyone in the UFO community really know anything about him, or why he decided to become vocal on the UAP topic? 'Cause I don't. So I decided to do some digging, and I found out that he's one of the most conservative members of Congress, and he also proudly represents the 5th District of Tennessee, which is literally right down the street from me. So I reached out to his office and was fortunate enough to land a 30-minute interview with him that I crammed into 45 minutes. So on a cold January Monday morning, I got dressed, called in sick, and drove the 2 hours it took to get from my house to his district office in Columbia. And somehow I even talked my wife into braving the icy sidewalks and joining me as I interviewed the congressman. All right, here we go. Hey guys, I'm here with Representative Ogles from Tennessee, and we're just going to have a little bit of an interview Q&A session to kind of introduce him to the UFO community at large. Because what I would say is you're a new face as far as Congress goes to this conversation. And I want this to be an opportunity for you to officially introduce yourself to those that are going to watch my video that might not be familiar with you and with your intentions, with your motivations behind being involved in this conversation. So the first thing I'd like to ask is, well, let me phrase it this way. We all wear multiple hats. We have a professional hat that we wear at work as a member of Congress. We have a dad hat. We have a husband hat. Why did you decide to start getting involved why do you have an interest in the UFO subject professionally and then personally? Like, what are the two reasons that you got involved?
Yeah, so, hi everybody, Andy Ogles. So I'm a local Tennessean, grew up here about 9 years ago, grew up in Franklin, we moved out to the country. And I'm on the NERD committee, financial services. So it's one of the more boring committees. It's a very important committee because it deals with the economy. And so everything we do is kind of just always serious all the time. But when you look at how old I am, and I'm not going to tell you, you can Google if you want, but I'm 50 plus. I grew up in that era of kind of post Star Trek, Star Wars, Close Encounters. It was very much a part of kind of pop culture, E.T., etc. And so there's always this idea, I think, amongst our age group of it's possible, or could it be, and if so, what if? For me, so that's kind of on the personal note. It's just to go down that road and ask the X-Files. The truth is out there. We may not like the truth. We may like the truth, right? But on a professional note, is I have serious national security concerns about this topic. Whether you think it's little green men or it's kind of the U.S. government in concert with private corporations, or it's a foreign entity. What I'm seeing is that these craft are engaging in areas that would be outside normal operating areas, right? They're in military traffic lanes. They're getting into commercial traffic lanes. There's activity around nuclear facilities and military bases. So if that's our technology, who's authorized that kind of invasive testing? And because it's so hyper compartmentalized, presumably, again, what's the safety protocols in place? If it's not our technology, is it little green men, or is it China, Russia, or a combination of the two? And so again, why is there activity around nuclear facilities? Why is there? You see that activity. Most recently on Fox, you saw the jellyfish. Footage that was released, really within the last week or two, even though that footage has been out there for a while. And so again, I think it's there's some serious questions that have to be asked, answered, and we just need to make sure that if it's our technologies are protected, and if it's not our technology, what the heck are we going to do about it?
Yeah. Well, I do find it interesting that we can get videos of jellyfish released to us, but we can't get them of balloons that get shot down over our country. That to me is still a shocking thing that we didn't get any video outside of the one, the Chinese reconnaissance balloon released to the public, even though it became such a large issue. So that's a shocking one to me.
Well, not to be too conspiracy theory on the balloons, scenario, but at first the Biden administration denied that it was, kind of anything that could be a threat to national security, and so they couldn't release it because it would have contradicted their narrative. Right? We now know that it was actually had spy capabilities. Oddly enough, if you look at Tennessee, you've got Fort Campbell, we've got the small Air Force facility, you've got Oak Ridge, and that thing threaded the needle right between all three of those as it headed east out towards the ocean, where it was ultimately shot down. That wasn't by coincidence, and it just kind of speaks to, regardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat or somewhere in the middle, the ineptitude of this administration. And I would argue, not to get off too far down the foreign policy lane, is we are less safe today because of this administration, and that really played itself out with the balloon. Now you talk about the Tic Tac video or the Tic Tac craft, or again the jellyfish, or all of the others that are out there, and what are we doing about it?
Yes. We now know what your interest is in the subject. Have you, so far with the involvement that you have participated in, have you ever been discouraged from participating in this conversation? Has anyone encouraged you to stay away from it?
I can't say there's been any kind of discouragement. I mean, I think for some, they kind of laughed it off as as a fool's errand. But we've seen the amount of whistleblowers that are coming forward, the footage that's coming forward, the enormous interest in the subject. I told you, kind of off camera, a few months ago, right after the first hearing, I was speaking to a group of bankers. Again, I'm on the nerd committee, and this is at the time where there's questions about interest rates and what's the Fed going to do and all this. And essentially, they got up and said, "Look, you're doing great work on committee. We know where you stand on the issues, and we appreciate you. Let's talk about UFOs, right? Like, what's really going on?" I mean, so again, you have professionals. A room full of professionals, and what they wanted to talk about with this phenomenon, and what the heck is it?
Okay. And something else that I find interesting about this specific topic is that it seems to have a bipartisan nature to it. It seems like it's both sides of the aisles are coming together on this one subject. Have you seen that before? Is this an anomaly in Congress as far as your experience?
Every now and again, you have topics that kind of lend themselves to being bipartisan, and this is certainly one of those. Obviously, going into a presidential race, it is very much partisan in D.C. right now. There's lots of conflict over virtually every issue, with the exception of UAPs.
It's been very interesting to see some of the faces that have popped up on both sides of the aisle. AOC is one that I'd never thought I would see talk about this. And then we have Marco Rubio talking about it as well. So we have senators, we have congressmen. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, and to your point, you literally, one of the groups came out, and they have me as the fourth most conservative member of Congress, right, based off of their metrics. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have you have AOC, and yet we're working together on this committee on this topic. And so again, it's a fascinating phenomenon, both from a bipartisan perspective, but also the videos themselves.
One thing that people are going to be interested in is finding out where you were, your base of knowledge about the topic before you became vocal about your interest in it as a congressman. Can you kind of describe to me what your history and your familiarity with the history of the UFO topic is?
Yeah, I would say I probably, compared to yourself and some of your audience, I have I'm a novice as far as my depth of knowledge, right? But again, because of kind of the era I was born, the fact that it's always kind of been part of the pop culture, I'm a nerd. I tend to read a lot, and so it's I've somewhat kept us in touch with the issue, and I loved X-Files, right? The truth is out there. In fact, when we did that press conference, I threw that line in there just as an homage to the X-Files and the fact that we have to seek truth, right?
The truth is out there, and the American people are ready.
And what you find in these hearings is they only answer the question that you ask. They answer it in as few words as possible. And you have to be very thoughtful in how you ask that question, because if you don't ask it in a very direct and specific way, they will obfuscate the answer. And so you literally can bump right up to the truth, but if you don't ask it in such a way that compels them to tell you, they won't. And so that's what we'll be facing as we kind of get to the future of what happens next. That's what we'll be facing every step of the way, is this constant, shades of truth. And so you just got to keep pushing. You have to keep digging, and you just have to not let up.
That's one of the frustrating parts about it, is they don't say, no, you're wrong, this isn't what it is, but they don't say, yes, there's some truth to it. It's always a dancing around competition to try to get answers from them. So I'd like to throw some UFO history at you real quick and just see if you're familiar with it. This is a good time to say that I don't expect Congressman Ogles or any member of Congress to have an in-depth knowledge of the UFO topic. After all, they've already got a lot on their plate and they're very busy people, just like you. But if you want to stay up to date with what's going on with the UFO conversation, give my channel a follow, because I make short, concise, information-dense videos about the UFO topic that are easy to consume. But I've also made longer content, including a recreation of the Wilson Davis notes so that you don't have to read them. I did a deep dive on the Air Force chapter on UFOs, and I crammed 70 years of UFO history into a 12-minute video. Now, back to the interview. You mentioned earlier you're familiar with Blue Book. Mm-hmm. Do you know the term ATIP? Have you heard? Okay, so you have heard of that?
No. So just go ahead and educate me.
ATIP is basically the government's UFO investigation that came out in the New York Times 2017 article that kind of put Lou Elizondo on the map. Harry Reid's interest became very apparent at that point. So that's kind of the catalyst for the recent movement that we're witnessing right now. So 6 years ago almost, that came out, and it's just changed the way that people are addressing this topic, as well as Congress is getting involved in this topic. So I think that's very interesting. Did you hear that former DNI Ratcliffe did go on the Maria Bartiromo show, and she mentioned
explain.
Have you heard that?
I haven't heard it.
Okay.
Oh, I haven't seen that interview.
Well, that's one of the things that blows me away, is that we have the former DNI talking about satellite imagery, but members of Congress don't know about it, or haven't been exposed to whatever imagery it is that he's seen. One other thing I was going to show you is I brought a prop. Have you ever seen this? It's the badge or the logo off of the NIM Aviation, and they helped put together the first UFO report. That logo was on their website until UFO Twitter got a hold of it and found out about it, started asking them questions. They quickly took it down and said that it was a mistake on their part.
Oh, we got you.
So I don't know if has that made it into the halls of Congress?
No, not really.
Did you know that the gimbal? Are you familiar with the gimbal video? It's the one where it rotates.
I have not seen it. No, we've discussed it, but I've not actually seen that footage.
That one, we only get a portion of it. There's about a 4-minute version of it that hasn't been released to the public. So
gotcha.
That I'm peppering you with some information to leave with, as well as just kind of picking your brain at the same time.
Well, and on that, the one that probably is most concerning to me is the one we call like the Tic Tac, right?
Correct.
Is you've got a craft that has no discernible propulsion, no discernible wings, no discernible cockpit, no discernible door, and it's able to maneuver in a way that kind of defies physics and technology as we know it. Of the ones that I've seen and familiar with or can discuss, that's the one I think is probably most concerning, because again it speaks to, all right, this is a different technology, this is a new technology. And the other question from a very practical standpoint, as you look at the administration and it's kind of push to go green or electrify the manufacturing and get away from fossil fuels, which I'm very pro fossil fuels, by the way, but that being said is if that's a technology we have, that's a new propulsion system, presumably by a different energy power source. Like, what does that do to our economy over the next 20 years as that is finally, we peel back the layers and that finally gets into the marketplace. And then meanwhile, we've spent billions, if not trillions of dollars getting away from fossil fuels to electrify. And yet we have sitting on the shelf the next technology. And so all of that from a sheer, the nerd in me, the nerd committee, that has huge implications. And why are we not having those conversations?
Correct. Then I can see my wife's head nodding and my peripheral because we watched the TMZ show about UFOs that Jeremy Corbell recently starred in, and they did talk about the energy aspect of it. And that was the one thing that really piqued her interest as something she had never thought about, was it could transform the way that we have energy production on Earth.
In some way, in lots of ways good, and in some other ways probably bad. But again, like these are things that we as Congress should be briefed on, should be preparing for, because I mean, our entire society globally is based around fossil fuels. I mean, much of the green energy that's produced is actually produced by fossil fuels. There's some irony there, right? And so
Yes.
you literally have a global economy that could be upended by this technology. And for whether it's lack of discretion or accidentally, it's been revealed to the general public. And so now, how do you put that genie back in the bottle? You can't.
Are you aware that the Air Force had a chapter in one of their textbooks that they taught at the Air Force Academy about UFOs back in 68 to 70? They taught their cadets about UFOs as part of their course curriculum. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you knew that San Marino, which is a small country over in Europe, has actually petitioned the UN to open up a permanent UFO office so that they can start having global conferences as part of the UN structure. Has that made it into your halls of Congress? Have you guys discussed that at all?
No, and I will say, as you start peeling back the layers and you look back at history, there is some collaboration. And quite frankly, our government has been involved in presumably investigations in other countries as you try to discern what was it? Was it experimental technology? Was it something else, et cetera? But the idea that the UN would do anything and do it well, in my opinion, is laughable. That gets back to me being one of the most conservative members of Congress. I don't trust the UN. And I think the last thing you would want is it to get hyper compartmentalized in Europe. And I think the free market exchange of ideas, the way it's happening now, is the way to go, with members of Congress and the general public driving the narrative, forcing the conversation as we move forward. Because once it becomes bureaucratic, especially European bureaucratic, I think it just a big curtain goes up.
Yeah.
My humble opinion.
So the big thing that I always get frustrated with is people will say, "How come you only see UFOs in the United States?" And it's not true.
That's right.
It's all over the world. It's all over the globe. There's a lot of members of the UFO community that are overseas that are just, once again, hyper focused on what's going on in the U.S. because we are more or less the tip of the spear for this conversation. So I find it interesting that the world is focusing on what the U.S. and you guys are doing right now as part of this conversation. So,
well, I mean, it gets back to our Constitution, right? We do have freedom of speech. We do have a government that you and I can disagree on a variety of topics, but we can sit down and discuss the ones we do agree upon, right? And that's not the case in many parts of the world. And so it has to be the United States that drives the conversation. And and maybe you'll find that one state or government actor within a country that's like, all right, I'm gonna give this information to the public, but I wouldn't count on it as we move forward. Now, we'll always take a nugget of information if we can validate it, right?
Yep. One thing I was going to ask you about is, are you familiar with Mike Gallagher, Representative Mike Gallagher? Mm-hmm. During the previous congressional hearings, he brought up and submitted to the congressional record a 13-page document called the Wilson Davis Notes.
This is a document in which, again, I'm not commenting on the veracity. I was hoping you would help me with that, in which a former head of DIA claims to have had a conversation with the Dr. Eric Wilson and claims to have sort of been made aware of certain contractors or DoD programs that he tried to get fuller access to and was denied access to. So you're not aware of that?
I'm not aware, Congressman.
In my 10 seconds remaining, then, I guess I just would ask, Mr. Chairman, unanimous consent to enter that memo into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Have you ever heard those? Okay, so
Yes, we have not discussed that yet in committee.
so that's one of the things that I'm always interested in is how are you getting information about what has gone on in the past and to formulate where we should be going in the future. You don't have a lot of time to research, I assume. So how do you get information?
Well, and one thing I'll say is, the question, just from a kind of practical standpoint, is at some point does this become a formal select committee, meaning that we have regular meetings, we have more regular briefings. Right now, it's still in its infancy, and so a lot of the information that's exchanged is between members, us talking about, sharing the information we know, but it may not necessarily be in a formal setting. And so I think it is, as we move forward, obviously the Speaker has his hands full. There's been a lot of upheaval in this Congress. I think there's a decent chance there'll be some sort of even temporary formalization of a committee on UAPs. But again, the Speaker's got a lot on his plate. But he literally could just basically breathe it to life to say, yes, we're going to do it and move forward. But right now, we fight for every hearing. We take the initiative to get it done. And, kudos to the ones that are kind of help driving the train on organizing it, because it's really us, we the members, versus you don't have a committee with staff and all the other stuff that some of the other committees already have in place, right? That infrastructure.
So it sounds like we got a long way to go to where we get it to the level where it's not the information within Congress is as substantial as the information outside of Congress, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I think part of it is arguably you need some sort of process to prioritize information, in some ways legitimize information, but that takes staff, and so it'll just take some time. But we had a good classified briefing the other day that I think help us gain some momentum and direction. So I think you're going to see more push from those of us on that committee to formalize the committee, to start having regular meetings, to have field hearings, and take it to that next level.
Okay, after the briefing that you guys had with the ICIG, you made a few statements that I found pretty interesting. A lot of it was compartmentalization, and one of the things that you painted a picture of trying to get this information is like working a puzzle. I don't know if you're familiar with what Neil Armstrong said at the 25th anniversary of Apollo, but I feel like it's very applicable to the situation that you're finding yourself in. He basically said that
there are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
And I almost feel like that's the battle that you guys are currently in, is you're trying to get to this information, but there's a protective environment around it that makes it almost impenetrable for you guys to get to. How do you think that you're going to end up getting to more information that would be valuable for you to be able to make the right decision on where to go forward?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just persistence. I think I said something in the press conference or my remarks afterwards. You could have a puzzle with 100 pieces, and then you disseminate those pieces or hand out those pieces to 47. I just picked a number, right? 47 people. So one person might have one, but this person over here might have 7. So you don't know how many people have what pieces of the puzzle. And when you go to one of those people, you can't just ask for a piece of the puzzle. You have to ask for the very specific piece of puzzle that they have. And so you literally could be asking the right questions. But if you're talking to the wrong department or to the wrong agency or to the wrong person therein, you're not going to get answers. So you just have to keep asking and asking and asking. Kind of the adage of leave no stone unturned. That's what it's going to take. And in some ways, as frustrating as it may be and as slow of a process I think that it will become, that does add complications, and is there information sharing, what are the safety protocols, etc. But also it protects information, and that's one of the concerns I have. So let's presume for a moment that it's our technology and we're partnering with private industry. I mean, there's a whole nother set of questions of where did the technology come from, but setting that aside for a moment. But how do we, if we have a next level technology, how do we make certain that it doesn't end up in the hands of the enemies, of our enemies? And if they have it, how are we using it to make sure that we're staying ahead of the pace, so that we continue to be that dominant predator on the playing field, whether that's economically speaking or militarily speaking, or in this case, the advancement of UAP technology. So again, I think the angle you're coming from is that technology exists. Where did it come from? One of the big concerns I have as we go forward is the technology exists. How do we protect it? How do we keep, you have foreign actors out there, and let's, again, not to go too far down the foreign policy track, you have China and Russia. They would like to supersede us as the sole superpower. They would love nothing more to see the United States kneel before them. And they would use this technology in some form or fashion to level the playing field, or quite frankly, maybe even to level us. So what are we doing to protect that technology? And that should be a very concerning question for anyone, whether you believe it's little green men, whether you believe it's skunk works in some special project that's happening and we just don't know about it, or a combination of the two. Regardless of where you're at on that spectrum, this conversation should make you nervous.
Yes, and that is one of the main themes that comes up time and time again when we look at the secrecy associated with the UFO situation. Is it so secret because they want to keep it from us, or is it so secret because they want to keep it from our enemies, and they want to make sure that they're the ones that crack the technology before anyone else? So you can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. So I feel like that is a lot of what we're seeing right now.
And I'll when you look at kind of psyops and how some of the saber rattling that countries do to signal to other countries, I do find it fascinating that some of this footage has been released. It has been leaked. What if we have cracked the code, and what we're doing is letting our enemies know that we have it and you don't? And so again, one of those probative questions that needs to be asked and appropriately answered. But again, what are we doing to secure that technology? Because if we have something that they don't, I can assure you they have a department, they have an agency, they have their own plan to try to get it. And so again, I think we're entering into a new phase of kind of military espionage as we move forward, when you look at these videos and presume that we have a hand in it one way or the other.
So that description that you just gave seems to align very nicely with what Dave Grush described during the congressional hearings, with a Cold War to reverse engineer this technology that's been going on for several decades. One of the other things that you brought up during the congressional hearing was the sightings around our nuclear capabilities, our sites. And then you asked a very pointed question that I want to kind of pick your brain about.
Is there any indication that the Department of Energy is involved in UAP data collection and housing?
I don't have an answer.
I can't confirm or deny that in a public setting.
And could you do it in a secure setting?
Yes.
They've had the crosshairs on them as far as the UFO community goes for a long time, as being involved and complicit in what's going on. Can I get you to expand a little bit more on why you asked questions about the Department of Energy?
Well, I think it's a logical place. If you if you think about what entities or agencies might have a hand or expertise in these types of conversations or projects, obviously you're looking at in any entity that's dealing with space or flight, so the Air Force or et cetera. But getting back to, say, the Tic Tac video, like there's a propulsion system in play. There's an energy source in play. So you have the Department of Energy that deals in that space. It would make sense that at some point they've been or are an important part of that conversation. It should also be noted, when you look at our nuclear facilities, they are all very well protected, guarded, And what a better place to store something than in a place that's already super secret and super hard to access would be a nuclear facility. So again, if we have a technology that whether it's an enemy, China, Russia, that has it, and they're trying to spy on us, or if it's something that we're testing technology to see if we can penetrate our own defenses, or if it's little green men and they're curious about what we have and what we're doing with it, it would make sense that they're active around nuclear facilities. But again, it gets back to that national security aspect of it, of what are we doing to secure the United States of America and to protect this technology if we have a hand in it, or protect ourselves from the technology if we don't.
So the secrecy associated with our atomic programs is what David Grush has alleged is overlaid on top of the UFO secrecy as well, which makes all the sense in the world, because they basically started to occur. It ramped up in the 40s, just like the atomic era did, and there seems to be some overlap in the secrecy associated with it. So it's very interesting to me that you've recognized that just from a overview of what's going on, that is a potential for where it's at, and we're looking forward to you pursuing that even more. Is what I'll tell you.
Well, again, it gets back to we've got to leave no stone unturned, and whether it's the Department of Energy or the Space Force or the Air Force or Secretary of Defense or DNI. I mean, there's lots of questions and lots of hearings that have to be had as we move forward, and it'll be interesting. And like I said, I think there'll be. Unless we stumble upon, just a gold mine of information. So I was playing Battleship with my son yesterday, right? You're kind of.
Do you let him win?
He beat me, actually. Okay. but to that point of, you really, there's a component of luck, right? So you're looking at the board, and I tend to work a grid, very methodically, but every now and again, you fire one off and you hit the battleship kind of thing, in the game, and so that's, I think, going to be this process of it's going to be very methodical. We're going to have to work a grid, so to speak. We're going to have to leave no stone unturned and just keep asking the same questions, and as you get answers, learn to refine your questions. Like in our top secret hearing, and I won't say who or what the question they asked, but they had a great follow up. And in doing so, and in the way they phrased the question, they got a valuable piece of information out of one of our witnesses that otherwise, had the question not been asked and re-asked, we may not have heard. I could virtually guarantee we wouldn't have heard. And so again, that's what you have to do in this process. I think you've got a great group of people, both Republicans and Democrats, both very conservative and more liberal, that kind of have a common goal here of, we have an interest, maybe for different reasons, but we are seeking the truth, and I think we're determined. I can only speak for myself, but I'm determined to get it.
I'm glad to hear that. While we're talking about Battleship, the Navy is the organization that we got the 3 videos from, the Tic Tac, the Gimbal, and the Go Fast videos. We've gotten 0 videos from the Air Force. It seems like the Navy is very cooperative, and the Air Force has been accused of stiff-arming UAP investigations from within the government. Have you had any experience with discussions with the Air Force or other branches that are reluctant or some that are cooperative to have the discussion?
We're just beginning to ask questions in department. So, I'm not going to pass judgment based off of kind of past actions or activities. I think there is kind of this push now and a legitimacy to this conversation. So it's like anything else. We've got to jump through all the hurdles. You saw where it was Gates, Luna, and I think Burchett had gone down to Florida, and they
Glenn Air Force Base.
That's right. They were stiff-armed, if you will, and a few phone calls had to be made, and ultimately they had a conversation. But you just never back down and keep pushing forward.
So that's one of the things that I kind of think about as far as you guys go. I assume members of Congress don't get told no very often when they're looking for things. So correct me if I'm wrong on that first. But then when you do get told no, does it make you want to even dig your teeth in further to what it is you're trying to get information about? Is it motivating almost to be told no?
Well, for me, it would be, right. I can't speak for the other three, but clearly they haven't backed down. So I think in their case, it is as well. And again, we have, we're the funding body. There's oversight there. And I totally understand that, with special access programs, SAPs, that you have to be careful. You need to be read into a project. These conversations may have to be held behind close and secure doors, but still we have responsibility to the American people to have oversight on these activities, and that's what we're trying to push for. Is that oversight and accountability, quite frankly.
So one of the questions that comes up repeatedly is why should we focus on this right now instead of the 100,000 other things and problems that we have to solve right now? How do you address that question?
I think that's a great question. Again, for me, I've kind of very much been on the conversation of national security, and so when you look at regardless of where you're at on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, you're seeing our enemies are taking advantage of our perceived weakness. So Russia, Ukraine. You have China has increased its rhetoric against and towards Taiwan, and a whole host of other things they're doing in the Pacific there. But and so this is right in line with that conversation of we have what I perceived to be a national security threat, either because it's a foreign actor or it's our own technology. And I'm not entirely convinced that this government has the capability of protecting that information. When you look at the espionage, when you look at the hacking, when you look at all the information China's been able to get from our own government, right? And so I think it nests quite frankly, perfectly with the current state of foreign affairs in that our enemies are on the move. Our enemies are taking advantage of our perceived weakness, and we need to make sure that this technology, whatever it is being properly protected, and there's accountability.
So I think that's a laudable goal. I think that's a great objective to have. And one of the questions I've always had is there's just a handful of members of Congress that are hyper interested in this topic. What's it going to take for the more members of Congress, the rest of Congress, to realize this is a significant national security issue that does need to be addressed and figured out what's going on?
Yeah, I think there's because of the hearings, and we had that open hearing where Grush was at, and it was like a rock concert. People were lined up, like literally. I had gotten to work early that morning, and I walked to work, and so before the doors even opened, people were lined up outside the building. Guilty. And then were lined up inside the building, waiting for somebody to get up to go to the bathroom so that they could come in. And so there's this. Our job is to represent our constituents, and so if your constituents have an area of interest, whether it's a national or international issue, or maybe it's a hyper localized issue, part of your job is to also take note, right? And so I think what you're seeing is members of Congress are like, oh wow, there's something there, but fortunately or unfortunately, there's really only so much room on the committee. And so I think you'll see the same faces and the same people in committee because there's only so much room. I think now there's probably other people that would love to be on it or part of it, but I think there's more interest than what you may perceive or that there ever has been, quite frankly. And I think too it's been legitimized in a way that just a few years ago members of Congress would have shied away from it. But like you said, you mentioned Harry Reid, you mentioned Marco Rubio. You now have senators in particular or members of Congress that are talking about it, and it's like, oh wow, we should probably be asking those questions. And look, the truth's out there. And you may not like the end result. We may find out this is totally boring information and it's just some next level technology that we created and that we own and it's proprietary, and we're doing a great job of protecting it. And there's reasons why we haven't unleashed it or released it to the marketplace yet. Like, it all may be very logical. And I think if that's the case, there'll be lots of people who are disappointed. Now, I'm not saying that's the case, but that being said, the truth is out there. And our job on committee, my job as a member of Congress, to be dogged, to not back down, to be a pit bull and keep asking those questions. And for me, it's national security, national security, national security, whether it's little green men, China, Russia, or some American corporation. any of the aforementioned could go rogue. And it's our job to make sure they don't.
So you mentioned that senators are getting involved. One of the things that I found significant is Harry Reid's legacy was brought up by Chuck Schumer when he submitted the Schumer Rounds bill earlier, the amendment earlier in 2023.
I thank my colleagues who worked with me on this legislation, Senator Rounds, Rubio, Heinrich, Gillibrand, and Young, for their partnership on this amendment. And as many know, my mentor and dear friend who I miss so much, Harry Reid, was passionate about this issue. And so were Senators Stevens and Inouye. So I'm glad we could get this into the manager's amendment.
How significant do you consider Chuck Schumer's involvement in this conversation at the level that he's involved?
Well, I don't know his motivations at all, but what I can say, again, he's brought it to the forefront, and when you have the Senate willing to talk about it, or leadership of the Senate talking about it, it lends credibility. You may not agree with him, or maybe you do agree with him, but that being said, it lends a credibility that, and I do remember, when Harry Reid talked about it way back when, that it was kind of I won't say it was laughed off, but it was, I guess, peculiar, right? Mm-hmm. But now in hindsight, he was the canary in the coal mine. He rang a bell. But from time to time, you've had those members that have had these kind of niche, interests, and they were kind of ahead of their time on those interests. And I think you've had members that 10, 20, 30 years ago were talking about this, but it was kind of like, whatever. Now it's part of the American psyche, and there's a lot of interest here, period, for better or worse.
So one of the frustrations that came out of the Schumer Rounds amendment is the fact that it was 64 pages when it first was written, and then it got gutted. Basically, what we in the UFO community consider by 5 members of Congress were able to stop the bill in its track. How does that's very frustrating that someone as powerful as Chuck Schumer can have his efforts thwarted by someone that's just a member of Congress that's just up against or doesn't see it the same way.
Well, I think, there's, although there's information that, the UAP UFO community wants, there's a beauty in what our founding fathers crafted in this particular case. And I think our founding fathers would be appalled at some of the other things that takes place in Congress, but that's a separate conversation. But, our founding fathers intended for there to be gridlock. John Quincy Adams was, he was a member of the House. He later became president. He was an ambassador. He did all these things. He retired back to the House of Representatives because it's where you argued and you debated. It was the people's house, and so yes, you had a handful of members that stopped that information, but iron sharpens iron, and you keep pushing, and you keep building a consensus, and you keep building a coalition, if you will, to get the truth out there. And so it'll be slow, and at times it may be frustrating, and there'll be those moments, kind of like in Battleship, where you find something because you just happen to throw a rock in the right direction. But that's you keep throwing rocks because you're not going to find those pieces of information unless you do.
So one of those rocks that I would recommend that you throw is, you've referenced the Tic Tac video a few times. Yeah. You see it hovering and then it exits off screen. The gimbal video is seen hovering, rotating, and then they fade out. Mm-hmm. They don't show where the gimbal goes. Right. And that would answer a lot of questions. I feel like that would be one thing I would encourage you to push for. And it was actually a question that I submitted to Representative Luna for the congressional hearings that she did ask.
Referencing the gimbal video Go Fast incident, can you just clarify, because to our understanding the footage was actually cut off at a certain point, but what happens at the end of that video, just for those Americans specifically that are wanting to know about the rest of that footage?
Where's the rest of that footage that could be shared with the American people to help us better understand what it is that gimbal represents?
Yeah, and we continue to push too to get that information. Maybe the first iteration has to be behind closed doors so we can fully understand, the gravity of the situation, no pun intended. But again, we'll keep pushing, and and I can say Luna's a bulldog, she's not gonna stop asking and pursuing. So she's a great advocate, as am I, as is Burchett and Gates and all the others. So yeah, we're gonna keep asking questions. And but again, the Tic Tac in particular is one that, again, what that craft does defies physics, as I understand it. And so I have questions, and I want answers.
Yep. The 3 videos are Navy related, and one of the current trends that's being discussed is during that congressional hearing, almost every encounter event that they described had a water element to it.
Other veterans are also coming forward to us regarding UAP encounters in our airspace and oceans.
Not just military, but also commercial aviation, because there's a lot of that going on, especially if you talk to anyone that flies from here to Hawaii. Over the Pacific, they see odd lights.
Sometimes these reports are reoccurring, with numerous recent sightings north of Hawaii and in the North Atlantic.
They were out on a test mission that day over the Gulf of Mexico.
During a training mission in Warning Area Whiskey 72, 10 miles off the coast of Virginia Beach,
All 4 of us, because we were in F-18Fs, so we had pilots and Wizzo in the back seat, looked down saw a white Tic Tac object with a longitudinal axis pointing north-south and moving very abruptly over the water.
Do you believe that you witnessed an additional object under the water in relation to your encounter?
I will say we did not see an object. There was something there to cause the whitewater, and when we turned around, it was gone, so there was something there that obviously moved.
A large group of Boeing contractors were operating near one of the launch facilities at Vandenberg Air Force Base when they observed a very large 100-yard sided red square approach the base from the ocean.
You've identified these as taking place on the East Coast. Is it just on the East Coast where these encounters have been reported?
No. Since the events initially occurred, I've learned that the objects have been detected essentially where all operations, Navy operations, are being conducted across the world.
I feel like, and a lot of us feel like, the discussion is going to start to go more towards USOs, unidentified submerged objects. Has that reached the congressional halls for you guys to discuss amongst each other? Do you guys talk about maybe there's sonar readings that are telling information that that would be valuable for you to have access to?
Yeah, we just keep pushing it, and I think one of the questions would be is there similar amounts of information with the Air Force, or are we seeing more? Is it around? Again, is that initial observation based off of because we don't have a full picture yet, or is it because that it is primarily based around water? Or it should also be noted that when you look at naval craft, there's a lot of nuclear technology based in and around those craft, and so again, it kind of goes back to the Department of Energy, and it's just a wide open space too, right? I mean, again, whether it's us testing it, it's the enemy testing it, or it's little green men, the vastness of the ocean, the ability to move without detection, it strategically makes sense. If you're going to do some, kind of a probing reconnaissance type of activity, you're going to come from that direction versus hovering over Chicago, right? You're going to get sighted. Yeah. So, but well. Any last thoughts or last questions as we close it out?
I've got 2 more for you real quick. You mentioned Representative Luna. Yeah. After she left the classified briefing, she said that we should pay attention to the specific words that David Grush has used, and she chose to focus on the term interdimensional. Do you have a word that you think that we should focus on as far as David Grush's testimony?
Not in particular. What I'm trying to do is follow. What I'm trying to do is follow the evidence. Set aside any preconceived notions that I might have. Set aside any preconceived notions that we're trying to be pushed towards, and follow the evidence. So that way you have a clearer picture. And so you're always looking at a kind of a 360 view of the information that's before you, and by doing so, I think you're more apt to see things than versus I'm going in and I'm looking, for a yellow band that's on the table. Well, the yellow band may be on the table, but that may not be the piece of information or the band that I need to pick up. And so I think it's important that we go in with eyes wide open. But his testimony was eye-opening and riveting. I go over that hearing and my conversations with him over and over again. Like, what is that question? What's that follow-up question? Was there a nugget of information that was missed? Can you piece together 2 or 3 parts of the testimony to get a clearer picture? And I look forward to future conversations with him as well.
And that's going to be my last question. Everyone wants to know, when are we going to have the next congressional hearing? And you've also mentioned field hearings. I don't know the difference between, as a civilian, a congressional hearing seems very official. A field hearing, I don't know exactly what that means when you guys say that.
Yeah, so basically that's on site.
Can you call in whoever you want at a field hearing?
It's just like doing it in a room in one of the Rayburn or Cannon, one of the others. It's the chairman would call a committee. So like you look at Homeland Security has done a field hearing on the southern border. You've had the Judiciary Department has done a field hearing. They actually did one in Nashville around intellectual property. So again, it's just basically going to where the information is, where the experts may be, and so that perhaps you get people coming to the committee to testify or witnesses logistically. Instead of you having to come to me or getting multiple people to come to us, we go to them. So it's, but also it highlights. So again, when you look at Homeland Security and the southern border, it's not just information. You're going to the border, where the fence is open, where you have people crossing behind you, and you're really shining a light on it so the American people can see it. So I think that's the value in a field hearing, is going to where some of this information may be.
All right, this is triggering me to ask you one more question if you have just a little bit more time.
Just a second.
If you have a hearing and you could have, I don't expect you to name names, who would be the one witness that you wish could show up and you could ask questions at a hearing?
Oh, wow. It would probably be location dependent. But again, I think you're going to have that same set of questions is going to have to be asked over and over and over again. So whether it's to NASA or to the Navy or to the Air Force or any number of alphabet agencies or to the Department of Energy, because again, we're just going to have to be methodical. And so in that, you'll have different sets of witnesses that you're bringing in and hoping to find.
Who's your dream witness?
I don't know that I have one. Sometimes the best witness isn't the person who you think, it's the person that works for them or the person that works for them, because they see things, they hear things, and they may be more apt to disclose legally the information they have.
All right. Well, I won't take any more of your time, but I greatly appreciate you letting me have some of yours, and it's been a fun time coming up here to Columbia and getting to hang out. So
that's right. Well, safe travels back, and again, I look forward to having another conversation.
All right. Awesome.
Take care.
I just wanted to say thank you to Representative Ogles, but also to his staff that was very generous with his time with me. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Mickey, and you guys have a nice day.